I think we'll get started. So, as I say, welcome. For those that don't know me, I think everyone we've met before. So, my name is Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO at Pimento. This is our fifth in our monthly panel discussions. You'll notice we have a new name, Marketing Spice Live. It's part of a portfolio of content we're sharing right across channels, from podcasts to webinars and so on forth, with agency owners, brands, consultants, and guests right across the year. If you've not been in our previous calls, as I said, please use the chat box at the bottom, or if you want to make any comments, please do so. We want to make the session as interactive as possible. Today's session is entitled Releasing Your Inner Book, and we'll be joined by four successful authors, all from within the Pimento network, who will be sharing their experiences and motivations with us. The panel includes Dr. Rachel Laws. She's a futurist, marketeer, and author of Using Semiotics in Marketing and Using Semiotics in Retail. And she's a fellow of the Marketing Research Society. So it's teeth in again, the Market Research Society, even better. Christine MacKay is CEO and founder of leading animation agency Salamandra, and author of Destination Animation, How Smart Marketeers Convey Complex Messages Memorably. And finally, Michelle Morgan, former agency owner, now author, award-winning entrepreneur, and leading voice on mental health. Michelle has just published her first book on Own Your Own Awkward, or How to Have Better and Braver Conversations About Our Mental Health. The session will be chaired today, so I can sit back and enjoy, by Nick Band, who himself has spent a lifetime in writing, first as a journalist, then as a PR professional, and finally as an author himself of 2 business books, and most recently a children's book, which I can highly recommend. After 20 years heading up his own PR agency, Nick sold the business and went freelance, working predominantly with Pimento on various communication projects. He's also director and founder of the specialist marketing recruitment business FutureWork. So there you have it. What an august panel we've got. I'm really looking forward to this one, a little bit different from most of our sessions. So I'm going to hand over to you, Nick.
Yes, thank you.
You can take control.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, indeed, this is very exciting because it's the first time we're not specifically talking about marketing, and we have 3 people here who've embarked on quite an adventure, really, and it is quite an adventure because I have done it. It's not simple. It is said that everyone has a book in them, but for most people, that's where it stays, unfortunately, and it never gets written. But you should try it. You should try it. It isn't easy, but you should try it. Just a word of warning. This is not really a Richard and Judy book review session, because I want to drill down more into some of the challenges that they faced in writing it, in getting it published, in marketing. So I'm gonna start with Christine, but I will bob in and out of lots of different authors to get their perspectives. Now, Christine's book, which I have read, by the way, I mean, I have genuinely say I did read it. It is the definitive guide to animation. And I think if anyone wants to go into animation, this is the book to read, because it tells you every single step of that journey. I wish I'd known it when I commissioned Christine and her company to make an animation for me, which we got there in the end. It would have helped me enormously if I'd known this. So, Christine, tell me, you were sitting in the office one day, you thought, I'll write a book. Is that how it happened, or is it a bit more complex than that?
Well, it's a bit more complex. We get asked, and I get asked personally a lot about, what is the animation? How does it work? How do you know what's in my head? How do I commission it? What are the different styles? And literally, what is the journey to creating particularly a business animation? Although we also work in entertainment as well, and children and stuff. But that's really why we started thinking, well, we keep getting asked this. Why don't we actually create something that explains the whole journey, what you need to do, how to brief, how to find a good agency, what is required, what are all the different plethora of different styles you can use, what length do you want it, what do you want to get out of it, what's the message, what's the call to action, all those elements. And people are often surprised of the different layers within an animation, because unlike film where you're filming something that already exists, there's gravity already exists, the sun exists, there's light, etc. With animation, you create everything, the sounds, the voiceovers, which could be in any language, and obviously what's going on in the animation itself. And now with the augmented reality and virtual reality, there's all sorts of different dimensions that you can use the animation in. But it's such a fantastic tool. We're so passionate about it because particularly in business where you always have some kind of complex message, you can be genderless, culturalist, you can have any language, you can be very, very photorealistic, go right into a piece of machinery, or you can, you know, be very painterly. So for us, it was about getting that across. We already had so much of that in our heads, so much of that processes. So we shared it so that people could understand A, the complexity of getting it across, and then B, how to do it, hopefully infallibly. So that was really the starting point.
Yeah, and what was the hardest part of doing this? Because there's quite a lot of detail in this book, isn't there?
I think the hardest part of doing things was actually once, you know, we did the first draft, or I did the first draft, I had lots of help with existing collateral that we had already, and stuff that had been written by a marketing department and by our animation director, things like that. So it's kind of collaboration from that perspective. But the hardest thing for me personally was the editing, because what you do is you write the first draft, and you get your beta readers to you know, have a read, and it could be friends and family, or, you know, business colleagues, and then before it even goes to the printers. So and then, you know, they come back with their wonderful suggestions, without which, you know, the book wouldn't be where it is, and then you redo everything and then send it off to the printers. They then edit it at their point, which is, you know, very professionally done, and, you know, all the things that you hadn't sort of thought of, but it's that editing part where you have to go back and reconfigure everything, and, you know, I found that really, really hard.
Yeah.
That's probably just me. Some people love that part because it's
Yeah, well, we're going to come
and...
back to that, the role of the publisher in the moment, and I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but I'm going to go over to Michelle, if she can unmute herself. There we are. Hello there. Now, Michelle, as Stephen has explained, is a mental health ambassador. Now, talking about mental health issues is an extremely difficult subject, but if you reveal all about your own personal health issues in a book going to be read by millions of people, that is really on a different plane. So this is an epic book on mental health, and encouraging people more to talk about it. So Michelle, what was your trigger? What inspired you to lay it all out there? Because it's quite personal in places.
Yeah, absolutely. The book came out of my own experience of mental illness and stigma and shame. And I know that some people on the call will have heard me tell my story. And, you know, that title, Own Your Awkward, comes from a stigmatizing comment that I received just as I was about to step out of the business that I had co-founded and led for 16 years, because I was utterly burnt out, and at that stage had undiagnosed depression and anxiety, but they were definitely escalating in the background, and I wasn't really, and I hadn't been talking about them. But at the moment that I had a big physical and mental burnout, and as I stepped out of the business as a pretty open and honest person, I did reference the difficulties that I was experiencing with my mental health as well as physical. And I received the comment, "It's a bit awkward when you talk to the business about your mental health, Michelle." It's a throwaway comment. I'm sure it wasn't meant maliciously, but it landed in a way that was crushing and silencing. And that was at the end of 2016. And that is where the new phase of my life then began.
Right. So what was it, quite cathartic writing this book?
Absolutely. You know, I can't say it wasn't cathartic. What I would say though is actually, you know, I was writing it this time last year. And before that, I had been sharing my story a lot. I'm sure that people have heard my story more than once on this call. So I'd probably gone through a big chunk of the cathartic bit, and that it really had then turned into a new mission and purpose in life. So I would say that, yes, the experience was cathartic, but the book was driven by my wish to scale up my mission, which is to make mental health an everyday conversation.
Now, Michelle, one thing that really struck me about the book was this lovely analogy you have of the stress jar. you remember that one, obviously?
Yeah,
Can you explain how this works? I think it's excellent, because you can be perfectly happy until that last drop of stress goes in there and it overflows. Do you want to quickly explain it?
Yeah, so simple way of explaining is, if you imagine a container or a jar or a glass, and that represents how you hold and manage stress, how you take on board stress. Stress is not always bad. Stress helps us get things done, but stress can become disproportionate to our ability to hold and manage stress. And often that happens in our busy lives, where we're taking more and more on. And as we take more and more on and our stress levels begin to rise, the cup, the container begins to rise to the top. What we should be doing is using helpful coping mechanisms to manage our stress. That might be talking, it might be exercise, it might be play, or doing something purposeful. But often what happens, I'm not saying this happens with everyone, but often what happens is when the stress levels are rising, helpful coping mechanisms drop off. And often what might happen is unhelpful coping strategies might kick in. So the opposite, not exercising, maybe using alcohol, engaging with alcohol more than is helpful. Not talking, bottling things up, working more, working longer hours. And so if you imagine a little valve or a tap at the bottom of that container, that's what lets our stress out, and it's let out and it's working well when we're using good coping mechanisms. If we're using unhelpful coping mechanisms, the valve gets blocked. So when the valve gets blocked, the stress begins to rise. It's got nowhere to go apart from at this moment where it gets to the top. It's an emotional snapping point and it flows over. And this is burnout. This is developing poor mental health. This is not kind of healthy stress that's helping us get things done.
So we either need a bigger vessel or we need a bigger tap at the bottom to let it out. We
need bigger awareness and self-management. And actually, I think we all have a responsibility to do our best to look after our mental health and be aware of it. That's kind of part of my next rallying cry, actually.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'm now going to move over to Rachel, if you're there. Yes,
hey.
Yes, you are. Now, there's the book. Oh, you can't see it because I'm holding up a book. But it's on there. Now, when I first got a copy of this book, I thought, God, this is a bit niche, isn't it? Semiotics, what are semiotics? Semiotics, not just in general, but in retail. But then once I climbed into it, you realize that semiotics are all around us. And everywhere we go, there are signs. One of the things that Rachel asks in our book is the question, where have I seen this before? Now, I think it's a really important point. Do you want to expand on that, Rachel?
Yeah, I want to expand on that just really quickly. So semiotics, it's a research method that can be used by marketers and market researchers. I also want to say, however, it's more than just a market research method. It's actually a whole branch of Western philosophy, right? So it'll keep you busy for a lifetime, right? And because it's such a big discipline, there are a whole load of sort of trigger questions and hypotheses and prompts for thinking, which I've set out in 2 books now with more, hopefully some more to come, right? But it's a big topic. So where do you even get started, right? So the way you can get started with it is by, I think, the easiest question of all, which is, where have I seen this before? Right? And so I'll just really quickly tell you a story which you may know, Nick, from the beginning of the book.
Yes,
right?
I was going to ask you about this story.
Yeah. People like this story. This is a very, it's like a micro example of the work that I do every day. Okay, so I had a client who owned a brand of fruit jam, very nice luxury product, lovely quality product. Brand awareness was great. People liked the product, no problems, right? It was a nice brand they'd created around themselves. You know, it was all wrapped up in their kind of European history and their brand origins. You know, but they'd rented a shop in you know how every European city has like an old town, an old quarter where the tourists go, you know, so they'd rented a shop in like the historic old quarter of a well-known European city, and it was performing abysmally. Lovely product, people like the stuff, why was it failing, right? So they called me, and this is often what happens, and said, can you go down there and find out what's going on, right? So I went down there and took a lot of photos of the interior and the exterior of the building. My spidey sense was tingling while I was there, you know, because there were a lot of features of this store which were a bit unusual, and I could see what they tried to do. So because it was a premium brand, they tried to dress up the store and make it look classy. Like whoever designed that store, that's what was on their mind, right? So they'd got their retail staff dressed up in these very smart black uniforms. They've got lovely stone tiles on the floors, kind of vaulted ceilings. The quite minimalist packaging, really, with these jars with these sort of discrete labels on, all lined up tidily on some black rows of shelving, all very nice. Okay, sounds okay, doesn't it? You could see what they were trying to do. They'd even got a display in the window outside. They'd got, it was a weird kind of window. You couldn't quite see into the shop, so they just kind of made an arrangement in the front of the window. They'd got what I can only describe as a plinth right in the middle with a big jar of jam on it, and right above the jar of jam is an old antique looking portrait of somebody who might have founded the company, some nice heavy velvet curtains either side of this thing, right? So I took a lot of photos. I got back to my desk and asked myself this question: where have I seen this before? Which is a question that you ask on behalf of consumers, so we're not always well equipped to tell you, right? And you can find the answer by, you develop a hunch, a hypothesis, you go on Google Images, you start collecting some images to test your hypothesis. And it became very clear to me that where I'd seen this before was the funeral parlor and the crematorium and the columbarium. So a columbarium is a room where funeral urns full of ashes are stored, right? So this store, they were trying to sell food. They were inadvertently selling death. It really wasn't a surprise that nobody was buying any food in this store. What they'd done was they'd accidentally created a very upmarket funeral parlor, complete with the funeral directors. Even even the fittings and furniture in store. Do you know how in the UK, when we have a funeral, like coffins and things like that are nearly always made out of a light coloured wood with like discrete little brass fittings on it? Would you believe it? They had exactly that for their counter and all their shelf space. It was horrific. So this question, where have I seen this before, is a way to solve mysteries of why, for example, why is this store failing? So when I figured out what the problem was, and I was then able to also provide some solutions. So I knew what they were trying to do with their brand story. It was this lovely story about 18th century Europe. And I was like, look, we're in a city where the 18th century is everywhere, right? So while I was out on my little field trip, I went round some other stores, bookstores and fashion stores and luggage stores and all kinds of places, and photographed all these kind of 18th century styles, you know, and showed them to my client and said, look, no one in the 18th century was dressing like a funeral director, right? People wore jewel tones and sugary pastels, and furniture was covered in bucolic scenes of shepherdesses, and, you know, food was very elaborate, and people used to do sculpture with pastry and all that stuff. When they could see what I could see, then they were able to make the necessary changes in store, and sales finally recovered. And that right there is how you get started with semiotics.
Yes, and then it's obviously, it goes into a lot more depth, the book, than
it will keep you going for a lifetime. There must be like
it's
100 of these.
It's actually a good read. Can I talk, and I'm going to take you once in turn on this. Can I talk to you, Rachel, about getting it published? Because there's one thing being able to write it, is the second finding a publisher, unless you decide to publish yourself. Obviously it's your second book, so you have a track record, but how easy was it, or how difficult was it?
It was, I'll just quickly talk about the first book, if I may, because it's probably more relevant for people wanting to write their first book. So number one, I waited until I was ready. So I've been practicing semiotics commercially for more than 20 years now. And people have been saying to me for years, you know, well, you should write a book. But listen, folks, writing a book is hard work. It will take months. There will be times where you feel like it's sucking the life out of you. So you need to be sure that you're good and ready. So I waited until I was ready, you know. And then, but then really, it's just a case of when you know the book you want to write, look around for publishers who are publishing similar types of things, you know. And then if you're lucky enough to be able to network and get an introduction to somebody on the commissioning side, that helps, but it's not strictly necessary. It's really just a case of look for a publisher who's publishing books similar to the one that you want to write, and then write a proposal. It's just a business proposal. You just say, this is what's going to go in the book. Here's why it's necessary. Here's the size of market. Here's who's going to read it. Here's why I'm the best person for it. And that'll
how much of the book do you have to show them in advance?
The thing is with writing about semiotics is that firstly I'd published like 50 or 60 conference papers. There was no shortage of writing samples out there, you know. Also the proposal itself, in order to explain semiotics, like I just told you about the story about the jam shop, I mean, that eventually turned into a chapter of the book, you know. So I didn't actually write sample chapters, but you had because I'd already got a long history, and the proposal itself was in itself a sample. But maybe other people write sample chapters. Yeah, it's not the hardest part though. It's much more, the more difficult part is writing a good quality proposal, where your publisher wants to know how are they going to make money out of this, and that is the question that you need to answer.
So for us marketing folk, it should be easier than someone who's not in the business, because we write proposals all the time.
Exactly.
So that's a good one, folks, if you're thinking of writing a book. Christine, can I turn back to you now, and your relationship with your publisher? And I don't mean that in the way it sounds. How did you go about getting it published? Did you write the book first, or did you write a chapter, or just have a concept? Did you pitch it? How did it go?
So the publishers that we use, which I highly recommend, Rethink Press, they help you the whole process. So they've got a whole process on how to write the book, and how to achieve that. Without which I wouldn't have been able to do it, because I tried for 6 months beforehand on my own. And with the team, we're sort of trying to together collaboratively to put something together, and it just didn't work because we didn't have the structure. We were busy doing other stuff. And with Rethink Press, it was great. They had, you know, they said, look, we can guarantee that you can write your first draft within 90 days. And, you know, I was like, oh, right, okay, whatever. But we did, you know. I was in a group of other writers, all business writers from around the UK and overseas, and we kind of motivated each other along the way, and using their process really helped, and it really helped to cement what you're trying to get across, and also to Rachel's point, there's so much stuff that you already have in your head and you don't even realize, and it's so much content and so much, you know, juicy stuff that, you know, your target audience wants to hear about, whether it's case studies or what have you. And I'm personally not a morning person at all, but I got up really early in the morning. I used to write from say 6 till 6:45 or something like that every morning, and just in my bed. So I didn't even get out. I literally put the laptop on my knees and just carried on writing. And then through that, using their system, that's how I started to get it all out. And actually, I was quite surprised that I don't know if it's that time of the morning or something, but because I'm also really passionate about what we do, it's sort of, I don't know, there was definitely a voice behind the writing, which was I was quite surprised about, and people said, oh, it sounds just like you, the way you talk, you know, which I really liked, because that's kind of what I wanted to get across. So yeah, there's definitely a process. I mean, as I say, it depends who you go with. They're great. They also not only sort of then, once you've done all your beta reading, and they do the editing, and then they do everything else, they publish it, they do help you with the marketing, etc. So it depends what you want out of it. For us, it's not about selling billions of books and making loads of money from the book. For us, it's kind of like a sort of an intro calling card, a sort of sharing the knowledge, you know, sort of getting people to understand what it is that we do, because quite often people don't get it. Like I spoke to somebody the other day, and I said, oh, you know, I work in business animation. He said, oh, what, like the Thunderbirds? I was like, no,
they were puppets, weren't they? Chrissy, did you have to write a proposal in the same way as Rachel did?
Well, only in that yes, not such a formal one, but more about what I wanted to do. Yes, and because we are actually the first book on B2B animation, it was snapped up as an idea. So yeah.
So the first publisher you went to accepted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. Michelle, what about your journey? How was your sell-in to publishers?
Well, I got commissioned by Welbeck at the beginning of last year, but that had definitely been a journey. So I had the beginnings of a book for a good 18 months prior to that. And I definitely had a little bit of luck at first because I had a very strong introduction into a very big, well-known publisher who I informally began developing the book with. You get no guarantees at this stage, but it got to a certain place where she, as the editor, then felt she could take it to the publishing team, to the editors, and it got through with a little bit of feedback and tweaking, got through that stage. And then it goes to kind of the acquisitions meeting, which is everybody. It's sales and marketing and the editors. And at this particular publishers, you have to get a majority vote. And I got a 50-50 vote. And I really understood why I wasn't taken on by them. Very simply, I didn't have a big enough social media network. It was as simple as that. You know,
that's
and it
surprising.
didn't really take into consideration because it's harder to prove my business network, which of course you can sell in bulk to. Anyway, that was quite gutting, I have to say. So patience and perseverance is really important if you really want this book published. I then, you know, I asked for help. So I then got to another publisher. They liked it, but they had a lot of mental health writers on their books. They weren't a specialist, so they felt they had that covered. But I then got the person that said no to me, then introduced me to another editor, publisher, and I got it to her, and she commissioned it. So it took me 3 goes. I think there were benefits. There are definitely pros and cons with going with a smaller publisher. But I loved the experience of working with their team, working with an editor, working to the feedback of Joe, the publisher. You know, that helped me massively shape it. But from start to getting it commissioned, it went through 3 iterations that were all quite different. Firstly, called PJ Days Are Okay, which is very, very my story led. Then it became It's Not Awkward, ! Which was me shouting into the silence and the stigma. And then it wasn't until so it got commissioned on It's Not Awkward. And when I started writing it, I had an absolute light bulb moment, stimulated by an Instagram post by Brené Brown. I'm going to imagine lots of people have heard of. And I looked at a post that someone had shared one day, and it said, "Stay awkward." And I'm there writing a book that is saying it's not awkward. And, you know, I listened to Brené Brown. I thought, hold on a sec, why is she saying stay awkward? And it took me down a road that I hadn't thought about, but it took me down the road where I wanted to then understand, well, why is it awkward? Why was it awkward for that person? Why did it make me feel awkward? Actually, it's not true that it's not awkward, even though I've shared my story many hundreds of times before I started writing it. And then realizing, oh, hold on a sec, it is awkward, that moment when I'm going to tell you about my mental health or ask you about your mental health. And then I discovered why it was. And, you know, that's become a chapter in the book.
Excellent.
And a different title.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, I know we've only got a few minutes left, and I know Molly's watching me. can I just ask the audience has anyone else in the audience actually written a book? No? Does anyone want to write a book? Come on, Jeremy.
For many years, I wanted to write the definitive guide to the best toilets in London.
You're being serious, are you?
No, I've been serious. Yeah,
Okay.
I was fortunate to work for an advertising agency in the sort of like late 90s called Lower Howard Spink. That was a wonderful office, and they had their toilets designed by Lord Linley. And it was in those sort of thriving years where agencies basically had more money than sense, and they were beautiful. They're beautiful. And it got me thinking, actually, and my various sort of trials at Pimento, where we've never had offices, we've sort of tripped around London, walking into the odd hotel or decent restaurant to use their facilities. What a variety, an interesting, eclectic bunch of loos there are in London hotels. So I felt there was a book in this. So I could have done an outline, but I haven't really taken it any further than this. But I'm not sure where there's a market for it. I'm not too sure who the audience would be.
Has anyone said it's a crap idea?
Exactly.
So, other than Stephen, has anyone got a book in them?
Nick, yeah, I've just sort of throw something in here. Another one of our members, George Hughes at Small Films, has just published a book in the last week or two. Tried to get on the call, but he's on a shoot today, called Resonance. Bought it on Amazon. I haven't had a chance to read it because I was on holiday when I spotted it. It was here when I got back at the weekend. Tried to get George, but he's just sent me a text message a minute ago saying he's on a shoot. Otherwise, he'd be.
But can you hold my book up?
But basically, the subhead is Unleash Your Brand's Potential with Video. So it's the video version of Christine's animation, probably. I mean, I've not had a chance to cross-reference, but just thought I'd mention that we've got another member of the network writing a book.
Excellent. That's probably quite a few more. I guess
Stephen, just so you know, there's a couple of great books called Spending Time on the Loo that have been very successful. I think there are 2 volumes of them. In fact, I have a volume of it. Maybe that's where your book should be read, mate.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And moving on to some more serious, I want to end this talking about the final part of the publishing journey, which is the marketing of the book. Presumably your publishers give a lot of support, but they will expect you to do things. Yeah? Anyone?
I want to say that I'll just quickly throw this in there. So there's a huge debate, of course, about whether to publish traditionally or to go the self-publishing route. I decided to go with traditional publishing, and an unexpected benefit of that was that this book, Using Semiotics in Retail, the new one, the license for that has just been sold to a publishing company in China. So they will now translate it into Chinese and sell it in China. So I would have found that very difficult to accomplish by myself had I self-published, So I think that's, if you want to sell internationally, I think that's a strong argument in favour of going the traditional publishing route.
Can I build on that, Nick? I got a literary agent on board. Again, kind of it all lined up in the right way. So that means that I give 20% of, not very much right now, away to an agent. But for me, I can teach myself how to do many things. I did not want to teach myself how to publish, market, and write a book. So for me, having experts on board, whether it's the publishing team and all that gives you, or an agent. So I didn't even really have to look at the contract, and I cannot tell you how much of a difference that made to me in the experience. So for me, worth,
Yeah, it's an interesting dimension. What about you, Christine? Have you been busy on social?
Yeah, I think it's the book gives you plenty of collateral to use on social media. It could be anything from starting a conversation, interviews like this, for example, actual pieces or thought leadership pieces on social, and it just gives you lots and lots of content. Basically, you can repurpose a lot of that. So we've been doing that. We've actually, to be fair, we should be doing more with the book than we currently are, but we've just been so busy recently. But I think it opens up lots of different possibilities to be able to use that book. We send the book as a sort of an intro to potential clients as well, or people who've shown an interest. So it does have lots of different.
It's not just about sales, is it, at all?
No, not at all. It really is a very useful marketing and communications a tool just in itself, you know. And to your point, Nick, earlier on, you know, you read the book and you, I wish I'd read that earlier because then the process is so much clearer. I get it, you know, going forwards, you won't hesitate into how to commission, brief, etc., etc.
Yeah, exactly. I see there's a few hands up. Jeremy, your hand is up.
Yes, as a question really for the panel. I mean, a friend of mine promoted a book on Facebook just yesterday, and it was Leadership 101. I have to say, my first reaction wasn't, well done, Tony, for writing a book. My first reaction was, does the world need another book on leadership? So my question really is about motivation, I suppose. I've often thought about writing a book. I always think, is it for my ego? Is there something to have achieved, like running a marathon, running a book? Or does the market need another book on subject X? So my question is, when you went into write your books, how much research did you do to find a territory that was original and interesting and wasn't repeating what maybe many other people have already written in different forms?
Good. Who wants to take that?
I could say that from my perspective, we kept getting asked, so you know, whether from a professional perspective or a friendship perspective, whatever. So there was curiosity in the market, and there wasn't a book on B2B animation. So to answer your question, you know, that sort of helped us to decide to do it. But also, if you follow Daniel Priestley's Key Person of Influence, for example, he highly recommends for any person who potentially runs a business or is a entrepreneur to write a book as a part of a whole set of steps to get yourself out there. So I think you can win on many counts being an author in business, and it doesn't have to be just a narcissistic, you know, ego boosting thing. It can be a really useful business tool. But to your point about, you know, picking the subject, I think that's probably quite key as well. And if you have got a subject, I imagine, from my humble opinion, if you've got a subject that has been covered before, then maybe do it in a slightly different way, which would help.
Okay, Michelle.
Okay, I'm going to say I wanted to write a book. I wanted to see if I could write a book. Yeah, that's ego.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
However,
Me too.
however, you know, what book I wrote absolutely needed to be led by a need, a gap, and everything in that book, including, you know, having a little bit of a tussle with the publisher about I wanted it to be about mental health information so that we could build people's confidence. I wanted it to be about frameworks so that we could build their capability. But I also really wanted it to be about my story and other people's stories. So I've got like about, I don't know, 30 contributions in different ways throughout the book. And yeah, that was challenged a few times. But for me, the insight and what makes it valuable is the combination of those things, because I think they are the combination that will help people feel more confident and capable to have a conversation about mental health. So it wasn't just about ego. For me, it was about scaling my mission. And I'll tell you, the other thing was, in writing the book, it helped me build on my own ideas and frameworks and things that I could offer. You know, so
you did it. Yeah, as we said earlier on, it was part of your therapy to write that book. So to a certain extent, you did write it for yourself, but with the view to helping.
I'm going to say I wouldn't class it as therapy.
Okay.
That's, you know, how I view therapy, and I have a professional to give me that therapy.
Okay, so self-healing is not part of this process. Rachel, do you have anything to say? Did you write it for yourself?
I wrote it because I explained semiotics a billion times over 20 years. And I got to a point where I just wanted to be able to go, look, here you are, look, here. But in answer to your question, Jeremy, I researched the heck out of that. Because I loved that. I kind of loved the discipline of writing a proposal for my publisher. Right? Your publisher will have proposals are full of hard questions. And some of those questions are, why is this book necessary? Why does it need writing now? And why are you the right person to do the job? And answering those questions is a very useful exercise. And if I didn't know what the answers were, then I guess I would have written something else. That I was more, that the market needed more, and that I was more suited to. So I love proposal writing. At first you think, you know, it's annoying, I just want to get on and do all the creative stuff. No, the proposal writing is laying the groundwork for your book, and it means that you will be very, very sure about what you are doing before you start investing a lot of work in writing your manuscript.
Really good advice.
I had a follow-up question, Nick.
Hang on.
A really quick one.
I've got someone desperate to ask a question.
It's a really short question. How do you know there's a book in it? In this disposable culture, everybody wants things immediately. How do you know there's a whole book in a subject you want to write about and not an article?
I've been doing this for 20 years and we've only just scratched the surface of all the things I could say. I hope that I will continue to write now forever for the rest of my life. Now I've started, I'm unlikely to stop. Semiotics is a branch of Western philosophy. There's enough there to keep all of us busy for another century.
That's a good answer to that one. Can I just bring in Nick Washbourne? I think he has a question.
Did I have a question up? Did I? Yeah, no.
Where are you?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Oh right, sorry. I think.
Oh, no, I can now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about being a co-author on a book with my business partner. It's something that we've talked about over the years. We've actually got someone in the business that's kind of reignited this thought. He said, "Oh, you know, I'm going to lay out this book that you guys need to write, and get your ideas down." Have any of you? It sounds like you've all written books individually. Have any of you considered this and what you think the challenges are of co-authoring?
I think it probably depends on what the subject is and whether having two or various heads together would add to the richness of the content. Then absolutely. I think you know, to Jeremy's earlier question, if you know whether you've got enough to write a book, I mean, you've got to actually do a sort of a format and sort of the chapters and what goes in those chapters first and foremost anyway. So you can see how much content you've got. And if you're partnering up with somebody who's got as rich a knowledge in other potential elements to yours, then it kind of makes sense, I think, to do it together.
Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, there's an issue of your different styles of making sure the writing styles are cohesive with each other.
I can maybe offer a different answer on that. So I've seen it done really well, and I'm quite envious of it. I would cite Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis. I don't know if any of you know, they're working in our industry, and they wrote Squiggly Careers together, and then You Coach You, and you can hear their voices. Christine, I shared that. People say they read my book and hear my voice, and I think that's wonderful. And you can really hear Sarah and Helen's, and you can see how them kind of bouncing off each other and sharing the writing, each writing a chapter, sharing it back, worked quite, I think it looked like it worked really efficiently for them, but it was directly coming out of their business. So I was envious of that. And I wouldn't rule out writing with someone. However, what I discovered about the writing process, and actually what I discovered about writing a book, whether it's the writing bit or the promotional bit, I loved it. And I hope that I can write a book number 2. I really loved the experience, but the bit of writing it was sometimes there would be a bit of team, but that, a lot of it was quite isolated. And it really suited me at this point in my life. And I want to recreate that for book number 2.
Does anyone have any final questions before I wrap up? No, well, I hope everyone's been inspired today to just do it.
Just one question. Obviously, coming from a background at Disney, where the book was the start of the story, the book that led to the film that led to the ride that led to all the opportunities for consumer products. To what extent, when you're setting out and writing a book, are you thinking about actually other ways in which, other channels you can exploit that content and what you can do with it?
I massively was. It came out of training and storytelling. It got better, more refined and more. And as I was writing it, I could immediately see how I could take it into the next product, which would be a hybrid of live and online training and learning. So yeah, I absolutely could.
Yeah, Christine.
If I may say as well, one of the surprising things that came out of my book was the feedback I've got from lecturers and students. In fact, the foreword is written by the head of Animation UK, and she actually said very kindly that it is a marvelous guidebook for students, because university students tend to think in animation, tend to think about going to the Pixars and the Disneys and what have you, and they forget about commercial animation, which requires different skill sets and a different approach. So that was quite a surprise. But absolutely, Steve, to your question, we really wanted the book to work in lots of different ways for us as a business and as a way of sharing our passion.
Great. Okay, well, thanks all to our panel for taking part